unusual urge for bossiness there. Everybody's been telling me what to do lately. Anyway, we're absolutely delighted to have Wallace Shealy. We don't get to see him as much because he lives over the mountain early. And he's very busy over there with work and storytelling over there. But tonight, he's our feature teller. And the feature teller is one who's given more time to tell one long story that they've been burning to tell, or multiple stories. So it is Wallace's choice tonight, what he's going to be telling. So please welcome Wallace Shealy.
Everybody seemed to have a scary story tonight, and I just can't quite get it out of my system. So I promise the second story won't be a scary story. I just got to tell this one more time. It's a story I learned when I was a little bitty kid around the campfire, and it made me shiver. And I still, when I hear it, it's like, ooh. There was a little old lady who lived in a little old cabin. The cabin was just about to fall down. She didn't have very much at all. She had a little garden back, but by this time of the year, maybe some root vegetables left in it, but nothing much at all. She was really hungry. And so she decided to go out and late in the day and dig in her garden to see if she could find some vegetables. She found some root vegetables, and they were kind of gnarly. You know, by that time of the season, they're not the best. Sometimes they have bugs in them, and she thought maybe the bugs would be the only protein she would have for the evening. She gathered 3 or 4 root vegetables and put them in her little sack. And then she looked over and she spied something. It was like a root sticking up out of the ground. That looks like it might be interesting. And she went over and she pulled on the root, and it had hairy little things. She pulled on it again, and suddenly there was a snap, and it came loose. And she held it up in her hand, and she realized what she had was a big, hairy toe. But it had meat on it. It was protein. So she stuck it in her bag. And about that time, deep in the earth, she heard a groaning sound and decided it was time to hurry back and make some soup in her cabin. As she turned to head back toward the cabin, the wind began to blow. Yes, you could feel the chill coming into the night. And she could feel the chill running down her spine. So she hurried along, and as the wind blew, she thought she could hear the sound of the wind. Hairy toe, hairy toe, who's got my hairy toe? She got in the house, she closed the door. She was just sure she was imagining things, and she was so hungry. Maybe it was the fact that she was hungry. So she put those vegetables, she cut them up, and she put them in a pot, and she put the hairy toe in on top, and she hung it right over the fire to simmer. By this time, snow was falling outside. It was going to be a cold night, and there's nothing better than a good hot bowl of soup on a cold So she scooped her up a bowl, and a big piece of that toe fell into the, she was going to have protein. And she enjoyed her soup. And she sat down by the fire to rest. And you know, I don't know about you, but when I've had a nice meal and I sit down to rest, the next thing I know, I'm just kind of out of it and snoring a little bit. And my wife is ready to punch me because I'm making all those noises. But she was startled away. I was at the window. She heard some rapping. She said it must be the weather, the storm blowing through. And she went over and she tightened the window lock down. And as she looked out, she saw a shadow outside. Scary. And she thought she saw a man and he said, I want my hairy toe. My hairy toe. You stole my hairy toe. She was waiting a minute. She was sure that it was just some indigestion from those root vegetables, maybe the ones with the bugs in it. She was imagining things. But she was ready to be done for the day, because that had kind of scared her. So she went upstairs to her bedroom and she pulled the covers up over her. And soon she fallen back off to sleep. In the dark of night, she heard a rapping on the downstairs door. She wasn't expecting anybody. And suddenly the door that was safely locked burst open. The door that held closed broke into pieces. She covered up because she wasn't going to sleep with one. But it was all right. He was coming up the stairs anyway. It was one of those out-of-bounds. Up the stairs. And there was that shadow in her head, and she covered up. Pointed to her and said, you took my hairy toe. I want my hairy toe. Well, she sat straight up in the bed, threw the covers off, and looked at him and said, I ate your hairy toe. The neighbor had heard all of this racket, but as a neighbor with good judgment knows, you don't go out in the middle of the night when you're hearing strange noises. So he didn't check on the neighbor until the next morning. He went over. She was no place to be found. There was only a bowl, a pot of soup, still simmering on the fire. She wondered where she's gone. But she didn't come back. So she went on home, and the dogs began to growl and scratch in the garden. And so she went up to shoo them off. And she realized there, in the back of the garden, was freshly turned soil. Where there'd once been a grave. It seemed deeper than it was. You know how graves do? They settle in. It was the old man in the grave, I think, had gotten back his hairy toe. The only way to get out are now two But you know what? The bowl of soup is still by the fire. And I'd be glad to offer you one now if you would like a bowl of hairy toe soup. Dad a few years ago, but I made a deal with him when he was died at 90, when he was 64. I promised him I wasn't going to tell Dad stories as long as he was alive. Well, in my family history, there'd never been a Sheely man that made it past 65. I figured I could make it through 6 months. 90. More than 90. And he was still rocking right along. So I haven't gotten to tell this next story very often. Disloyalty and the big game. A personal story. I was born into a house that expected unquestioning loyalty to the home team. In my dad's house, it wasn't Tennessee. No, not North Carolina, but south of the border in South Carolina, there are 2 choices, a right choice and a wrong choice. One team, the one from Columbia, was only ever spoken of in derogatory and even blasphemous ways. The other team in the upstate of South Carolina, the other team, the university in South Carolina, as far as my father was concerned, was Clemson. You're absolutely correct. I took my first road trip as a small child, the 168 miles from our home to Tiger Country. I had an orange onesie and I learned to crawl on the turf that is Death Valley. By 3, I knew the Tiger Route. Tailgate was the best meal ever served, and it always featured fried chicken. It was finger-licking good. Now, the only thing I knew about Columbia and Williams Rice Stadium was they had the fair there every year. And we always went on Big Thursday during fair week. Not for the midwives, but because the rivalry game, the in-state rivalry games played on Big Thursday. Clemson would demolish its rivals, the Gamecocks, every year. It was such a pleasure to be there. Like any good Sheely, like every Sheely there had ever been, we bled orange. When it came time for me to go off to college, my dad took me on a road trip to Greenville, South Carolina, to the Ford dealership there. And on the back lot at the Ford dealership in Greenville, South Carolina, there's a lot with nothing but Clemson orange pickup trucks. And my dad said, one of these comes with acceptance to Clemson. It was a bonus to seal the deal, to ensure my place in the family line. I had other dreams. I wanted to go into nonprofit agency administration, and you just couldn't do that at Clemson. So I decided to come to North Carolina and enroll in the American Humanities program at High Point College. Fortunately, High Point then nor now actually ever really fields a football team. So my youthful error for the moment was overlooked. The summer of my freshman year, I only came home for a couple of weeks. It was a busy summer, but my dad set me down for one of those father-son talks. I can remember his quote to this day. I'm not going to pay for you to be a door-to-door helper on welfare. If you want my financial help, you will be enrolled at Clemson before the fall semester, or you will be cut off. That very day, the first Shealing Rebel was born, because I got in the car the next morning for my own road trip. By the end of the day, I was enrolled in the oldest land-grant university in the state of South Carolina, the University of South Carolina. It's perfectly clear that it is the school to go to. I had committed heresy. My brother that day achieved permanent preferred son status. My academic accomplishments were rarely, if ever, spoken of. I went off to Carolina. I was a Gamecock. That land-grant college had been established in 1865, a full 84 years before Clemson had even been conceived. I was proud of Gamecock. I had some things to learn about the big game in football. In 1977, Dad and I both made it to the rivalry game. By this time, it was played on the last Saturday in November. This year, it was at Williams-Brice Stadium. As usual, Clemson was running away with the game with just minutes left. But in the last 8 minutes, my Gamecocks came back and 24-point down. They made up and were in the lead. I turned and looked at my dad and said, in an unusually magnanimous way, Dad, why don't we call this one a draw? And Dad agreed. Now, Steve Ford was Clemson's quarterback, and he took the field with literally only seconds left on the clock. And he had other plans. He delivered a pass you wouldn't believe down the field to Jerry Butler for a touchdown that to this day is known in Clemson lore as the catch to achieve victory and history. 2 years later, the game was again at Williams-Brice. I was a senior. I was a member of APO, the National Service Fraternity, and in a couple of hours on the last Saturday in November, we raised enough money to pay for our service program for 2 years. It was going to be the biggest game of my life, and I made it. Some of you from Columbia, your history with Columbia might know this. I made it into to the concession area, and to the stand that was run by Cromer's boiled peanuts. And I picked up the merchandise that I was to hawk at the game. And I made my way out of the stadium and around past major donor parking. That's where garnet and black RVs are lined up along the exterior wall of the stadium, one after the other. Big money apparently talks. But I noticed something quite out of place. There in major donor parking was an old, dirty, gray fifth wheeler with a 10-foot-tall tiger paw on the side, and it was pulled by an orange pickup truck. I thought to myself, what is that thing doing in major donor parking? I was just sure that before the game started, they would have towed it away and ejected the owner. But I had a job to do, and I had to make my way over to the visitors' stand just inside the gate, because I had money to pay. And just as the gates opened, I made it to my position, ready to hawk my wares to the Clemson fans to separate each one of them from their $20. Get your rubber chickens here, $20. Here, son, I'll take one. My wife said, maybe he'd have taken 3. My dad, my cousins, they all came by. I sold them each a $20 rubber chicken. The only downside to the whole thing was you might get beat over the head in the stands with your own rubber chicken. It was okay. Before the game started, I had unloaded 2 gross of rubber chickens from my position and moved them into the stands. As I recall that day, Carolina kept it pretty close. I think the score in the 4th quarter was 9-6 in Clemson's favor. When my Gamecocks engineered a winning drive and beat Clemson 13-9, I made my way back through Donor Park. That RV was still there. An angry Clemson fan was making back a bad investment in bumper stickers in Clemson orange. They said, S Carolina 13, Clemson 9. I bought $20 worth and plastered one on the back of the car and went off to my senior victory party. The next Monday, I was headed to Dad's for a late Thanksgiving dinner. I stopped by the box and brought in the mail and came in and dropped it on the counter before heading into the food. Before I could fill a plate, I heard Dad's angry voice from the kitchen. Who sent this? It looks like a woman's handwriting. I went into the kitchen. There was a late Thanksgiving card. The outside of the card had no return address. Actually, the inside of the card had no signature. It simply said on the inside, SC13C9. Dad grumbled and made accusations through the entire dinner. And I got up and left to go back to Columbia, figuring that by Christmas, he might be in a better mood. Boy, was I wrong. That very Sunday, Pastor McCullough called not 5 minutes after church was over. my father, the council person, senior council person, usher extraordinaire, had stopped every single woman and accosted them as they came into the church. Did you send this card? It's not right, he said. It's like rubbing salt into a wound. Not a single woman acknowledged having sent the card. But there was an awful lot of snickering in the pews at Dad's expense. For weeks, he would stop women he knew and ask them about rubbing salt into the wound. But no one ever confessed. When I made it home for Christmas Eve, I went to the box and got the mail. But before I could get into the house, my dad was heading off to church. So I dropped the mail on the seat of the car and we headed off to church. When we pulled up in the parking lot, Dad had noticed a pretty red card, maybe from one of his girlfriends, on the seat, and he decided to open it. I noticed no return address. Before he could get it open, what seemed like an entire box of salt poured from the car. And he muttered to himself, rubbing salt into wounds. A little later, his favorite widow lady made it to church herself. And she had a nice Christmas card for me. Amazingly, the same red color as the card before. She said, open it later. When I found a chance to open it inside, it said, here's a gift for you that I can no longer use. And it was 2 reserved Carolina season football tickets, registration. She wasn't going to be able to take Dad and use those tickets no matter what. So to this day, I have to wonder. But you know, my time with the big game is past. My wife, I love her dearly. Some of you know her well. She is, well, let me quote her exactly. I am not an angry chicken fan and never will be. As for me, I will always remember the big game. I will always be a loyal Gamecock. Go Carolina. Beat Clemson. Get your rubber chickens here.
Thank you. I had never heard that one, and I'm so glad I was here to hear it.